what I would call career trajectory. You don't want to end up in the wrong seat, in the wrong company, in the wrong place. And next thing you know, you're 3 years down the road and you're doing something you never wanted to do to begin with. So what we always do with my group is when we talk to entry-level folks or folks in transition or folks changing careers, and again, our focus, like Liz said, is more the engineering and the technical talent. We always ask them what's called the $20 million question. And it starts out, if you had $20 million in your bank account right now, what would you be doing? And so think about it real quick. What would you all be doing if you had $20 million in your bank account? That equates to about a $400,000 a year salary for 50 years of your life. So pretty good, right? Take that answer and best you can. And Liz, can I borrow your screen for a minute? I'm going to bring up a little diagram that we use here as well. Liz, I don't know if I'm able to, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know if that's enabled yet or not. And you're still on mute, Liz.
I'm not sure why it would say that, because we've done this often with people sharing. So I'd have to play with that. If you want to shoot it over to me, I'll get it up.
Oh yeah, that'd be even better. So let me try to do that here. Anyway, think about that $20 million question. What you want to do with that is basically take the answer to it and then apply it to what as best you can in the real world. So if you like traveling, if you like to go to the beach, if you like to see different countries, there might be a job for you in sales somewhere. There might be a job in consulting. You know, if you like to build things, if you like to do woodworking, there might be a job for you in construction. So it's something to think about as far as when you're starting your career, where do you want to end up? I mean, the thing I always tell people is your work half your wake life. You want to really enjoy what it is you're doing when you're working and also during work. I mean, you want to like the people you work with as well. And that's very important too. We also ask candidates a lot of the time, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? You don't want to be in an environment where you don't get along with folks. And it makes it tough. We've all been there before. If anybody that's had a W-2 has worked with people they don't like. Liz, I'm sending this over to you right now.
Zach, I just fixed it. You should be able to share.
Oh. Oh yeah, we're good to go.
Okay.
All right, let me know if you guys can see this, maybe a head nod or good to go. Okay, cool. So yeah, take that $20 million question, all right, the answer to it, and that lands you right here, your ideal job. And I learned this a couple years back, and I love this diagram. So what you really enjoy doing, right? Your hobbies, your interests, things you like, what you're good at doing, what you are good at doing. So, you know, things, your talents, all right, that's where that possesses. And then all important things that people will pay you money to do, all right? You get all those in one, that's your ideal job. We love to be right here. And I can tell you firsthand, I am right here. I love competition. I love traveling. I love what I do. I love solving problems. That landed me right in the middle of here. All right, I haven't been to work in 10 years. I've been doing this for 10 years. It's kind of crazy. People ask, well, what are you going to do when you get sick of what you're doing? I said, I have no idea. Because right now I haven't been to work in 10 years. And most entrepreneurs can tell you the same thing. Dreams, they exist outside of this little realm, all right? There's nothing wrong with dreams, all right? You got to be able, what the difference between a dream and a delusion, according to me, and I'm the only one saying this, is feasibility. A dream would come with a plan. You'd be able to attain a dream and make it come true. So dreams can exist out here. If you like whatever, you know, can you do it? Is it scalable? Is it attainable? Can you put it into action? The dangerous part here, which we have faded, is called delusion. All right, recently, and Amy Lynn could probably attest to this too, you get some people that, you know, they have a great career. I mean, in particular, there was an engineer we dealt with recently that great career, high paying career, turned down his jobs that we had for him to pursue a career in building stock cars to race. And this is amateur. I'm talking not professional, amateur. And it's like, how are you going to feed your family on this? Long story short, 3 months later, he came back and said, that was a huge mistake. I apologize for doing that. I was stupid. I can't make money off of that. So it's important. I mean, sometimes that lesson is learned with a cost. Sometimes you can talk to professionals and they can wash out this delusion and maybe keep that as a hobby or something that you're not going to feed your family on. So back to you guys. I mean, this is where this comes down to, is you knowing who you are before you pursue your career. I mean, getting a job is one thing. Again, you spend half your wake life at work. You want to do something you want to enjoy. There's always that initial starting job, that springboard into your career, but always keep in mind who you are. And above anything else, do not lose yourself. Keep that in the front view, not in the rear view. And that's all I really have. I know we're limited on time, so I want to kind of wrap up just by saying that. So thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Liz and she'll get them to me. And if you guys would like me to share this, Liz can do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. So Amy Lynn, you are up next. Can you give us a little, some tips on how we can make our resumes as competitive as possible?
Amy Lynn, you're muted.
Just to dovetail on Zach, I think it is really important to know and be thoughtful about what you want to do. Do you want to work for a small company, a big company, a private company, a public company, a manufacturing company, or a services company? That come through a lot in your resume, as well as when you're interviewing, is really understanding what your passion is for what you want to do. So Liz, I'm going to ask you if you can pull up our attachment. That would be great.
Yep.
And I want to talk a little bit about how do you present yourself on paper. So I think most people know and have probably heard along the way that resumes really shouldn't be more than 2 pages. I think at this point in your academic career, if you are a new grad, if you can keep to 1 page, that would be fantastic. But if it bumps over to 2, that's fine. Your LinkedIn profile on a separate note can be as long as you want. So I generally tell people that what you really want to have on your resume is it's the ticket to entry, right? It's the thing that's going to qualify you for that job that you're interested in. So you want to have just enough information here that's going to make people want to say, hey, I want to learn more. So we'll just use Joe here as an example. If a hiring manager came to me as a recruiter and said, hey, I need somebody that is able to do these 5 things. Those 5 things are generally going to show up in a job description, either under the required skills or the qualifications. Those are things that someone has to have in order to be hired for that job. So generally what I recommend people do is to find 3 or 4 job descriptions that are of interest to you, to print them out, lay them down side by side, and with a highlighter, look at the qualifications or the required skills and find the words that are similar. So for example, in Joe's case, you'll see follow safety procedures, helpful teammate, motivated, quick learner. These are all things that Joe finds about himself to be valuable or assets to an organization that may hire him. They are also the things that were in the job descriptions under the qualified or required skills of the jobs that Joe was applying for. So they've done a lot of research on people's eye movement when they're reading resumes. And what they've learned is that people don't read left to right, top to bottom, like you read a book. Generally, I tell people, if you have your resume in front of you and you close your eyes and you open them, what's the first thing that you see? What's the first thing that jumps out at you? That should really be tied back to the job descriptions that you're applying for. So in Joe's case, you'll see that we have a hyperlink to his LinkedIn profile and a hyperlink to his email address. This makes it really easy for a recruiter to be able to click on those and immediately either learn more about you through your LinkedIn profile or connect with you through your email address. People oftentimes make the mistake of putting this information in a header. And I think that makes it really hard for the recruiter because then they have to open the header and then click on, your email address. So just, I always say, make it dummy proof, ease of use for the recruiter or the end user. So make sure that those are hyperlinks. I think a branding statement is really important. So in Joe's, you'll see the always striving to provide a higher level of service than what is expected. This is who you are. When someone thinks of you, or if you've ever heard about your 30-second elevator pitch, this is who you are. It's the jingle that you hear on the radio or on the television commercial that's going to remind people of who you are as a person. And then the highlights of expertise are really what you do. So you may have some very specific skills here. Maybe you know SAS, or maybe you're really good with Excel or pivot tables or what have you. Those are things that you would find in the required skills or the qualifications of the job description that you also want to include here in these highlights of expertise. Because again, when a hiring manager or recruiter are looking at your resume from the top down, the first thing they're going to look for is, do you meet those qualifications? If they see that you do in the very top of your resume, then they'll probably generally look at the bottom of your resume to see if you meet the academic qualifications. Now, coming out of college, a lot of people have their academic experience at the top. That definitely bodes of somebody who has just graduated. So if you have already graduated, I would encourage you to move that to the bottom and to more highlight your career summary or any professional experience that you have. So for someone that's newer in career, instead of career summary, your category there might say professional experience. And maybe that includes your internships or any relevant jobs that you've had, or at least shows consistency that you've worked through college. And then of course you want to have your academic or any certifications that you have at the bottom. Joe, in this case, does not have a 4-year degree, but he has taken some coursework and does list his high school diploma. So again, this is really the ticket to entry, and it's just trying to check off the qualifications of those jobs that you're interested in applying for. This is a very easy format to manipulate. So if you're trying to customize your resume for each job that you're applying for, it's easy to change those highlights of expertise. And I always say, put the most important requirements in that center column, because that really shows up whenever, again, someone initially looks at your resume. It's the thing that's smack dab in the middle. Things like numbers always are impactful because they jump off the page. So if you have anything, like maybe you did some cold calling through college, or anything you know, maybe closed some sales, things like that. Those are what we call impact statements that really do show up well and again, help to qualify you. So that's a bit about a standard resume. Again, it's unique to everyone. And all of those things that you can't fit here, that you want people to know more about you, I would encourage you to include them on your LinkedIn profile. So hopefully that helps a bit.
Thank you very much, Amy Lynn. I appreciate that. And if anybody has additional questions, we will follow up with those here at the end. But next up, let's learn about how we can interview via technology. So Patrick, do you want to jump in and take it for there?
I do. Thank you, Liz. My company, Robert Half, has been relying on video interview technology for a lot of years now. I was thinking through it, and I think it's actually been 5 or so. The interesting part about it was that was a complete and total paradigm shift for our organization. Previously, we had required a face-to-face interview with any candidate before we could even consider representing them. I think the interesting part now, based on where we are and looking ahead to post-COVID, I believe the video meetings are really here to stay in many, many cases. So which do we use most often right now? That would be Microsoft Teams and then Zoom. So obviously everyone's on Zoom right now, very popular, very user-friendly tool. Now, previous to those two, and actually previous to COVID, we were still using a lot of Skype and Skype for Business, of course, FaceTime as well. And then I'd say probably about 6 months ago, we started using Google Duo to communicate with candidates that were Android users. WebEx is another tool. Actually, I had a client just a couple weeks ago choose that video technology for us to conduct a virtual interview. So you've got Teams, Zoom, Skype for Business, FaceTime, Duo, and WebEx. So there's tons out there. But now let's switch gears a little bit and go for some basic video tips for all of you guys. And the first one is test your tech. Seemed like everybody got in this morning just fine. I know we might have had a couple of hiccups. So I'm going to say conduct a trial run, maybe even as early as like a day in advance of a video interview that you might have scheduled. Making sure that your equipment is working properly, your video, audio, and etc. Now, you also want to make sure the day of the interview, I strongly recommend logging in at least 10 minutes ahead of time. You want to make sure that you have all the software properly downloaded onto your actual machine and everything is working fine. And that's going to allow things to go much more smoothly. I would actually say one last thing would be, I think it's pretty important to actually create a profile using the technology that was recommended for the video interview. For example, for Zoom and some of the other technologies, you don't have to have a profile set up. There's usually a join via web link. But again, I've run into issues just trying to communicate with candidates and clients. So if you have enough time, strongly recommend that. So that was test your tech. The next is dress for success. Wear exactly what you would wear if you were going to a face-to-face interview. Now, of course, the joke is you could probably have jammy pants on as long as you're a professional from the waist up. But I can tell you from personal experience, I wasn't going to test those waters. So about 2 years ago, I had my first video interview as a candidate, and I was full suit. I even think, if I remember correctly, I even think I had my dress shoes on. But that's just me. So dress for success is number 2. The last one is eliminate distractions. Find a room that is free of outside noise. And also, don't forget, silence your cell phone, silence any kind of notifications on your actual device as well. You know, it's funny, you watch the news now, everyone sees the jokes where people's pets, their kids are coming into their video meetings. And yeah, it's funny. And I've had my kids in meetings with me too. But I think this is a little different. You know, this is still an interview. This is still an important part of your career progression, and it's your chance to make a first impression. So basically, I think it's pretty important to find a quiet spot. That's going to allow you to focus and put your best foot forward. And I think, Amy Lynn, I think you had something you wanted to share too on this one, so take it away.
I do agree with all of your thoughts. I do see my clients moving definitely more to the direction of video conferencing and interviews. I think, Patrick, I think you hit all the high points.
Sounds good. Then we'll turn it back to you, Liz, for the next question.
All right, perfect. So Luann, you are next on deck. So can you please elaborate on the types of questions that companies are asking during interviews and how to best appropriately respond?
Hey, thanks, Liz. Interviewing can be an intimidating process. You're put on the spot to immediately answer questions that can have a real impact on your future. So how do you make it less stressful? How do you make sure that you are successful? And it's an easy answer, but there's a lot of work behind it. And the answer is preparation. Whether you interview in person, over the phone, or by video, as Patrick and Amy Lynn are saying, that's being done more and more today, and certainly in these times, you need to have an idea of what you're going to say. The last thing you want to do is wing it for your interview. You need to convince that interview that not only are you qualified, but that you're a good fit for the company, they're looking at culture as well. And assume you're going to talk to a lot of recruiters and hiring managers. Many of us are not lucky enough to hit the most wonderful job within the first month or two of looking. So assume you'll talk to a lot. The good news to that is, like anything else, practice makes perfect. So the more you interview, the better you'll get at it. I want to talk about behavioral-based interviewing. Many of you are aware of it. Perhaps some of you have actually experienced it. And then I also want to talk about what I call more traditional-based interviewing. Today, most professionals doing hiring are commonly trained in behavioral-based interviewing, and that's really asking questions designed to elicit answers, or what I'm going to call stories, of your competencies and your particular approach in applying these competencies to real-world work situations. So you know you're getting a behavioral-based interview question when you hear, "Tell me about a time," or "Provide a recent example," or "Describe an occasion when." You may find, however, that hiring professionals may use a more traditional kind of interviewing, and that's where they essentially use your resume as the framework. And some may even combine the practices. So don't be surprised if you start getting behavioral-based interview questions and then all of a sudden more traditional questions straight off of your resume. My guidance to prepare is be prepared for the behavioral-based interview because it works well for the traditional. So you're going to want to prepare accomplishment stories. I'm going to use a model called SOAR. There's a lot of acronyms out there, but I find SOAR works really well for me. And SOAR is, S is situation. So this is where you're going to describe the situation. O is obstacle. So what's in the way? What's the issue? What's the problem? What is being resolved in this accomplishment? A is for action. So those are the actions that you took or your team took. And then finally, result. So that's the results that you helped to obtain and the benefits that you're going to provide for this accomplishment. The SOAR acronym, SOAR, it's easy to remember, and it gives you a good framework for preparing for interviews. I would recommend at least 10 to 15 SOAR stories. It sounds like a lot. Trust me, it's not. For people who are more experienced, you'd even need more. The stories come from accomplishments that you have done individually or as part of a team. Keep in mind, team success is also your success. And they're going to come from work experiences, of course, but academic projects, volunteer situations, anything where there's an accomplishment that's happened. It could be internships, etc. So having these stories prepare you for the behavioral-based, but the good thing is it also prepares you for more traditional. So how do you come up with these stories? A couple of ways or a couple of guidances. Look at the job posting, or as Amy Lynn mentioned, the job description. They're often going to include competencies. They're going to talk about things like, we want a team player, we want a critical thinker, we want an innovator or creativity, we want flexibility. So you're definitely going to want to prepare some accomplishment stories that would indicate your success at those kinds of competencies. The other thing you might take a look at is the resume. Now, Amy Lynn mentions on the resume highlights, and she's got listings of things. You also might want to throw in there a couple of accomplishments, maybe some metrics that you've accomplished. But for each of those bullet points, you should have an accomplishment story that describes something that you went through, a situation, the obstacle, the action taken, and then the result. So those are also the basis of accomplishment stories. And between the competencies and those bullet points on a resume, trust me, you'll come up to 10 to 15 without a problem. So those are ways to prepare, I think, best for the behavioral-based and traditional. I'm going to throw in just a couple of additional questions that may come up because they're kind of standard and you'll see them a lot. The tell me about yourself. It's often used as the icebreaker. Sometimes you go in, you chit chat, and then the first thing they throw at you is, well, tell me about yourself. Amy Lynn mentioned earlier about your elevator speech. You should have an elevator speech, but the elevator speech is the great basis for the tell me about yourself. It's that short, marketable, here's who I am, here's what I've done, here's my experience, here's where I want to go. Another question that comes up, why are you interested in working for us? Two quick answers for that. You need a HR recruiter and I have this great experience, or I have training, I have academic experience that would put me in good stead. And number two, I'm impressed with your business. I've checked it online. I really like what you're doing. I want to be part of it. Another question that comes up, what would your ideal career position be? Make sure it's similar to the one you're interviewing for. If you tell them you want to be an attorney and you're going for a customer service position, probably isn't going to work very well. Another question, where would you like to be in 3 years? How about here at your company, and growing in the job, building the skills from this position and moving on to future positions? And the last question I'll mention is, tell me about your strengths and your weaknesses. Strengths are easy. You've got all those competency stories. You can pick one and share it. Weaknesses become a little more difficult. Weaknesses, I would say the best thing to do, if you can, is redirect the question. Something along the lines of, you know what, if I look at the job requirements and what I can bring to it, I don't think there's any weaknesses that are serious enough to rule me out for this job. But keep in mind, if you have to talk about a weakness, be truthful, be credible, but make sure it's something that you can say you worked on and you've been able to turn it around. All right, so that's what I have to share. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Great tips there for us. So now, Richard, you are next on deck, and can you let us know what we should do now if we don't have a job in this COVID era?
You bet, Liz. Thank you so much, and such great advice. I have to say, I've been taking notes along the way, so I hope the rest of you have been as well. I have done a lot of consulting with people during periods of career crisis for themselves. And for many students like you starting out for yourself, as well as the tens of millions of people out there, it is understandably a panicky situation. 3 or 4 months ago when you were thinking about graduating, you were saying this job market is Fat City. We are in great shape here. And quickly it turns, and with that, kind of the emotional concerns and stress of what those challenges and changes are all about. But there are things to do in a crisis situation. I want to share first and foremost that if you're in a crisis situation, you do what you have to do. I was talking to a student the other day and she said, should I just take any job? And I said, absolutely take a job. Don't worry about it. Nobody's going to be critical of you taking a job under these circumstances if it's not in your chosen career area. I mean, you need a job to pay your rent. You need a job to buy beer. Let's keep our priorities in shape here. So you do what you have to do to address those situations. And there are positions that are out there. Grocery stores are hiring, convenience stores. I do a lot of consulting, done a lot of consulting with Sheetz. Most of you know Sheetz. That's a fantastic company to work for, great career opportunities. They're hiring. Warehouses, delivery companies, all of these organizations are hiring right now. So if you need a job, go ahead and take one. There's no danger to your long-term prospects if you're working outside your field. So first and foremost, do what you have to do to take care of yourself. However, if you have some luxury around time, and even if you take a job that's not in your chosen career, how do you begin to differentiate yourself? You don't really want to be in the middle of the pack. You want to be standing out from the pack. So the question is, how do you use this time during this pandemic to work for you and not against you? I moved to Pittsburgh about 15 years ago when I was recruited here from Texas to work at UPMC. And during the 2000, I had an executive position at the health plan. And in 2009, my position was eliminated, in part because I had kind of achieved what I had come there to achieve. And also UPMC was shaving jobs. And so I was out on my own. And I took about, I had some severance, so I had some luxury in my time. But I took that time during that 6 or 9 months to consider not only what I would do, which is what Patrick and Zach talked about, but also began to think about how can I leverage my special skills and knowledge in a way that I hadn't considered before. And the thing that I came to and that I have recognized about using that kind of time, or today around the pandemic kind of time, is the idea of building your thought leadership. Now, thought leaders are people who are informed opinion makers and have the courage to state their ideas and opinions. You know, Amy Lynn talked in this resume that she has up, which is great, has a branding statement, which says always striving to provide a higher level of service than what is expected. Great branding statement. What does that mean to you? How do you put that into real world perspective? What's been the experiences you've done? What does that mean to you? A thought leader will take that kind of branding statement, study it, and apply it in different ways so that you have become the expert in what that particular branding statement is about. Perhaps you don't have a branding statement that fits your work exactly. You can still begin to think about thought leadership as long as you are willing to consider an important factor in developing thought leadership, and that is that you have to be willing to think. If you're willing to think, then you have the capacity to be a thought leader or develop into a thought leader. You know, no thought leader, whether it's Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or anybody else, started off thinking they were a thought leader. They built this notion of finding a critical mass of information that they were an expert in, and they knew that. So for you as graduating students, you could focus on things like, how is the pandemic affecting you and your colleagues, your other fellow students? You could interview half a dozen of your colleagues and find out, how are you dealing with this? How it's affecting your industry? How will remote work, we've heard a number of discussions about technology, how will remote work affect your industry and the work of your colleagues? This is a newly emerging area. I've been seeing a lot of research written about what's the future of remote work. Facebook just announced that 50% of their employees will be remote within 5 to 10 years. What are the implications of that? What do you think as a young native technology person? You know, I had to learn I had to be adopted by technology. You're native to technology. All of you grew up with technology, with iPads and iPhones in your hands when you were growing up. You have an understanding of remote technologies that even people on the panel, many of whom are, almost all of whom are younger than I am, still are not as natively technologically skilled as you may be. How will this technology change your career path? Those are some of the questions to think about. But the important thing as you begin to think about thought leadership is you want to also think about what the solutions are. And as you begin to think about solutions, you can use a variety of platforms for sharing your ideas. You know, there's a story in the New York Times a few weeks ago about a 13-year-old who wrote an article about why she liked working from home in school, like being at home at school. And the primary reason was because her student colleagues in 8th grade were very disruptive. They talked in class, they talked back to the student, to the teacher, they got in fights with each other, and she didn't find that teaching or learning environment to be very helpful for her. 13 years old, and she has an op-ed in the New York Times. Now that's a pretty good thing to put on your resume. So think about writing an article for the newspaper or perhaps for your professional journal. Your professional journal has a online series, and I can tell you they would be very interested in an article by a new graduate about what it's like to try to find a job during a pandemic. Begin a blog. Start a blog around your industry, about the areas that you're interested in. Do a post on LinkedIn. Do a series of posts, not just a one-off, but make a decision that every week you're going to write a post on LinkedIn around something that you're observing in your industry. And start tweeting your ideas. You know, the great thing about Twitter is it's totally democratized. And so if you're looking for a job at Sheetz and you write a blog about convenience stores and what you like and where you think they can do better marketing, and you hashtag it Sheetz, somebody at Sheetz is going to see that. They read all of those things. Do a Zoom webinar or a Facebook Live with some student colleagues, professionals. Put together a panel from your field or former teachers and post it on Facebook or put it on Instagram. As I said earlier, also submit an article to your professional association. They love that. Begin to look for avatars, people who you admire and look up to as examples, and even consider reaching out to them. Who are the thought leaders in your industry? Write them a note, send them an email, post something on their website. Perhaps they have a guest blog, or respond to a blog that they may have. I responded to a blog post at Harvard Business Review once, and it was published. And so I get to say, you know, I have a letter that was published in the Harvard Business Review, which in my industry is important to do. Thought leaders make connections with others as well. It's one of the power of thought leadership. I did a webinar yesterday on leadership development sponsored by a global sourcing and consulting company called Vaco. which is located here in Pittsburgh, but their corporate headquarters are in Nashville. When I mentioned to their regional manager, Brad Rowley, that I was doing this webinar today, he said, hey, tell those students to call me. We're looking for smart young people. So when you do thought leadership, it creates these opportunities. And once you post things on social media, you can forward it to other people in the industry, maybe someone who you did an internship with, and or someone who presented in your class, and you wrote an article about something that they said that was provocative from your perspective. Another thing to think about doing is creating your own internship by curating different activities that you can engage in, perhaps on a volunteer basis or with a small business where you gather important skills. Luann talked about the importance of competencies. And if you approach a curated internship from a competency-based idea, then you get to add in your resume, here are the skills that I learned when working on a volunteer basis at the food bank, or when I helped do marketing at a small business that couldn't hire a marketing person. As you begin to build your body of work, you will see that your thought leadership begins to take hold and that you are in fact becoming an expert in your chosen area, even if it's adjunctive to your chosen career choice. That the expertise that you get by talking to other thought leaders, by curating different experiences, by speaking with mentors and colleagues, begins to make you the expert of how to transform where you are now to where you want to go. So think about thought leadership as a way of moving ahead of the pack rather than staying in the middle of the pack. And I think you'll find that you get your career not just going, but kind of getting to escape velocity. So thanks, Liz, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Those were a lot of very wonderful ideas for students. When you don't have a job, things that you can do to build your resume, really great ideas. All right, so finally, though, we are on to our last question for our panelists, and then we're going to turn it over to the students here. But based off of taking it the next step, so what should students expect when they are starting out their first career, when they're starting their career in this challenging market? And I believe, Patrick, you were going to start and share your history there, and then Zach and Amy Lynn were going to chime in, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So Patrick, if you wouldn't mind taking it away.
Sounds good. Thanks. So I thought I wanted to be a math teacher and a high school football coach when I went to college. Then I was introduced to college calculus. So the end result there is I have a bachelor's in business. I was able to leverage the on-campus career center, and I landed a job with Sherwin-Williams, the paint company. Great company, great training program, but not glamorous. I was mixing and delivering paint to muddy job sites wearing a shirt and tie. But I'll tell you, even now as I recruit for individuals to join my team, my sales and recruiting team, I keep an eye out for Sherwin-Williams. On a resume, I keep an eye out for Enterprise Rent-A-Car is another one with an outstanding training program that that has proven to produce solid business individuals. But I fell into recruiting about 17 years ago when I went to Robert Half as a candidate to see if they could get me a new job. Next thing you know, one thing led to another, and I've been doing it ever since, similar to kind of how Zach kicked us off today. I mean, I really do love it. Getting people jobs. It's funny, the governor doesn't necessarily call staffing and recruiting agencies essential or life-sustaining, but aside from the medical profession and those, men and women on the true front lines, getting somebody a job is pretty rewarding. I think it's pretty important, kind of just some of the things that Richard was talking about a minute ago. But anyway, enough about that. Was just kind of my story I wanted to share. But this is a pandemic. This is different, and this is about you guys. So there is a little bit of good news that I have to share. That companies are still hiring. And, again, this is kind of parlay off what Richard already started. Mostly these companies are those deemed essential or deemed life-sustaining, but I'm going to run through them just really quickly. Healthcare, pharmaceutical, anything in those areas. Finance, banking, mortgage. It's interesting. A lot of people are trying to tie this global economic crisis back to 08, 09. And, there's a profound difference between the two. In 09, it was primarily foreclosures, default on mortgages. That side of the business and finance was very busy, and then the rest was in an absolute crisis. But now it's both sides that are crazy busy, because you've got half of the population looking to take advantage of the low mortgage rates with refi and different real estate transactions. But then, of course, the unfortunate part is, we're going to see a big spike on the foreclosure and default side. So transportation, logistics, cleaning companies right now they can't get enough help. Nonprofit, not all nonprofits, but certain sectors, especially those tied to behavioral health, for example, or certainly anything with infectious disease. Government, for one example, housing authorities. We know through the CARES Act and through the some of the legislation passed, money is being pumped into government jobs. So there's going to be a great opportunity to get a foothold there. And then lastly, Richard mentioned sheets. Gotta love the MTO. He also mentioned beer too, Richard. So check and check. Thank you. Anything with food right now. Anything with food, they're hiring anything and everything. And these aren't just frontline jobs. Onboarding, recruiting, it's out there. So that's the message. It might not be your dream job, but I want to give some hope. There are companies out there that are looking. So Zach, I think I'm flipping it to you. You wanted to add a couple things. So take it away, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, to echo on what you said, I think the key takeaway is the first job out of college might not be the most glamorous job, but it is a job, and you need to, I should say strongly, you need to pick something that's going to get you on that proper career trajectory. Patrick listed a handful of the businesses that are still operating in the industries. And we received an exemption at my company. Our clients have not stopped. They have not shut their doors. Where I'm in my office right now, most of my clients are in their plants or their offices right now. It's there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of opportunity out there still. We have not slowed down at my group one bit. It's and a quick story on that. There's a client that has a position right now for an operations support / document control specialist. Not an area we focus in really, but they wanted our help filling it. I've had 3 candidates now that want to kickstart their careers, turn that job down and say they don't want to interview. I'm throwing my hands up saying, whoa, come on. Like, yeah, we're in a pandemic. And again, not the most glamorous job, but it's something on your resume. And I mean, my first job out of college was 100% commissioned sales through an office supply company. My major was graphic communication. I could not find a job in my field. And to be honest, I didn't want one. I did my internship in my junior year. I realized what I didn't want to do. I quickly gained a minor in marketing, and I pursued my minor. And there was nobody hiring for anything, so I took a job selling office supplies at 100% commission just to get something on my resume. And I was able to parlay that after 6 months into staffing in North Carolina. Then that brought me to Pittsburgh, and going on, I was with that company for 4 years. Quit there, went on my non-compete, and a year later started up my own company, and that was 10 years ago. And so it's about setting yourself up for the future. You got to ask yourself all the time, what would my future self thank me for doing today? So I'll end it with that. And I think, who was next here? I think Luann, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's me.
Oh, sorry, Amy.
I think it's a really interesting time that we're in. From a career perspective, I've always been envious of the people that I knew in high school or even in grade school that knew exactly what they wanted to be. I had a friend that knew from, the first grade that he wanted to be a pilot, and he's a pilot. I wasn't one of those people. I was never really passionate or sure about what it was I wanted to do. And so I fell into HR. And for all of those folks on the phone that are new HR grads, I think that you would find in talking to HR professionals or HR leaders that the majority of people fall into HR. They don't necessarily set out to be an HR leader. But I will tell you that what I'm seeing now is so many changes in the CARES Act and legal aspects of employment that affect people that ultimately bubble up to HR leadership. And so I think that because of those changes, HR is going to have more seat at the table, and they're going to be much more needed in the future. I have a fellow that I worked with this year that just accepted a job as a retention specialist at UPMC, because UPMC is really interested in making sure that they retain the talent that they have. We still have a gap of the number of people that are exiting the workforce as baby boomers and the number of people that are entering the workforce in the next generation. So there are a lot of jobs out there, as you're hearing from all of the recruiters on the phone. But what we've seen is people have to be willing to reinvent themselves. So we've heard the stories about where the brew house or the distillery suddenly started making hand sanitizer. Those are similar things that you have to think about with your career. So I always ask people, what do you have in your hand? What is the most important gift that you have or skill set that you have that you can offer an employer? And how can you take that gift or skill and apply it to what the employer's need is? So I would really be thoughtful about that. And I would make sure, just tying back, that your resume and your stories, as Leanne talked about, really reflect those passions and those capabilities. You want to be careful not to oversell yourself and manufacture things that you've done, but to really be honest about what you've done and how you feel you can bring value to an organization. I think one other thing that's really important is being able to differentiate yourself, because there are a lot of people in the job market doing something that's going to create a lasting impression and continue to remind people of that branding statement. So for example, I've seen a lot of people recently certainly sending thank you notes, which I always encourage people to do. And I always say a handwritten thank you note is much better than an email. But even more so now, tying back to what Patrick was talking about earlier, I think a video thank you is a really cool thing to do. It shows your capability in tech. And I think it really, again, is a reflection of who you are and keeps you fresh and in front of the people that you interviewed with. The last tip that I'll mention, somebody along the line talked about government jobs and them being plentiful right now. If you're not familiar, there is a website called USA Jobs, which lists all of the jobs in all of the different government bureaus, bureau by bureau. There are all types of different discipline jobs out there, from engineers to nurses to HR professionals and accountants. So that would be a great place to look as well if you are interested in working for the government. So I'm hopeful that some of these tips that we shared today are helpful to you, and certainly wish you all much success in your future careers.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much. So I know that there's a few questions here in the chat box, and I was emailed a couple questions. We have 5 minutes or so within the hour, so I do want to try to at least get the questions that are in there answered. But if you guys need to jump off, I do understand, panelists as well. If we're running over and you need to go, just wave goodbye. But Catherine is going to manage the chats that are coming through, or the questions that are coming through in the chat, and I'm going to just quickly read through some of the ones that I received via email. And any of the panelists, if you want to chime in, that would be great. Okay, so this first question has 2 questions associated with it. How do I explain to a new company prospect that a past employer will say they would not rehire me? I gave 2 weeks notice when I resigned and was professional about it, but the company was not happy that I quit. How do I get ahead of that situation? Anybody want to take that?
Liz, I'll jump. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
Patrick.
you first. You first.
I was just going to say that for the most part, when new employers or potential employers are checking references of employers, they're generally just getting information on your title and dates of employment. Most companies shy away from giving information about performance, just because it can get them into some legal issues down the road. So while you can't be certain that that's going to be the case, I would say the majority of the time that is the case.
So to just piggyback off of that, is it ever okay to say no when asked if they can contact a past employer?
I think that definitely raises a flag.
It does. I would agree with you, Amy.
I would not advise that.
Okay.
I'll just, Liz, I know we're tight, but just to, if there is an individual within that organization that would speak on behalf of you, I would definitely recommend, because I truly believe that references are very important, huge differentiators. If you can reach out to someone in that organization, if they were a leader, great. Worst case scenario, even if they were a peer that can kind of validate, I would go ahead and do that. And when you get to that point, make sure you list that individual, is contact and number when it comes time.
Thank you. All right, one more here. So my field of work is saturated, so I'm looking to switch fields and want to show it on the resume. But does HR staff disregard functional resumes, or are chronological resumes still the best ones to use? Go ahead, Zach.
I'm saying chronological.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Patrick.
Okay.
Chronological for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, functionals have a very specific purpose. On the other hand, they're viewed rather suspiciously. So I agree. I would still go with the chronological, but I would highlight those transferable skills.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, the last one from me. Actually, I had two. I've always been told that HR only spends about 50 seconds scanning a resume to consider. I know we touched on this somewhat, but how much time is spent on cover letters, and what are some of the top points that should be included with a cover letter?
I'm a fan of creating what I call a dummy-proof cover letter. And I think it should be very short. I don't think that paragraphs get read again, left to right, top to bottom. So my recommendation is always a short introductory sentence, 2 columns, with the left column being your required skills and the right column being my qualifications, and then just matching up qualification or skill for skill. So if they're asking for a 4-year degree, you can say, I have a 4-year degree from Pitt in HR. If they're asking for an internship or 2 years experience in the right column, you can list that. So just take those required skills or qualifications right off the job description, put them in the left-hand column under your required skills, and in the right-hand column, build out what you're capable of doing side by side with each of those requirements.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. The last one from me is just, is there a better search engine than Indeed? Seems that there's lots of advertising and things. So what do you recommend as a good job search engine?
Face-to-face networking above all. I mean, if you can get to when, right now we're in some difficult times, but when industry events start picking up again, getting to the networking happy hours, I mean, everybody in this panel could attest to how powerful face-to-face networking is. I mean, that's why we're all here. We've been involved with the PHRA forever. We see each other at the same happy hours. It's a powerful tool to be up to somebody, shake their hand, have a quick conversation over a drink with them or an appetizer, and walk away better and have made contact. You never know who you're going to meet. So it's kind of a pie graph where you chop it all up of what's the best. But in addition to the applying and the job boards, I would definitely make yourself an active member in whatever community you're looking to pursue a career in, an environment, I should say.
And I would add to that LinkedIn. LinkedIn for me is the absolute #1 right now. For job opportunities, you can search them the same way you search Indeed. You can set up alerts for yourself, email alerts, similar to the same type of functionality. And, just to kind of piggyback on what Zach said, it's a great way to do networking right now. I would never dream of conducting an interview, or especially meeting with a potential client. I would never imagine meeting them without having checked their LinkedIn first. So right now, and I know Amy Lynn touched on it before, but we were kind of pressed for time. If you haven't spent time on your LinkedIn profile, it's very important. And, you know, Zach had said it earlier, if anybody is interested in reaching out to me, you can get my contact info from Liz. I would be happy to run through your LinkedIn with you.
Thank you for that, Patrick. That's very appreciative. All right. So again, we are close on time. I'm going to flip this over to Catherine right now and have her run through the few questions she has. And then she also has a little bit of a prize that she wants to share with everybody. So Diane, if you're still on the call, we haven't forgot about you. We're about to do that right now. So thank you. So Catherine, it's your stage now.
Perfect. Thanks, Liz. So it looks like we have 2 questions currently in the chat box. So we'll start with this first one. How many years should a career summary cover? Amy Lynn, would you like to take that question?
Sure, absolutely. I would say as far back as it's relevant. Now, again, I think it's a little bit different for new grads. So if you're a newer grad and you've worked some internships or you've worked some jobs in your freshman, sophomore year, I think showing that consistency or initiative is really important. But once you get further into your career, I would say I always advise people to only go back as far as their experience is relevant to what they want to do. So in other words, if you were a nurse as your first job and now you're trying to be a lawyer, I may not put my nursing experience, or at least I wouldn't put a lot of information about it. I wouldn't use a lot of space for that. I would really focus on what's relevant to those required skills and what you've done that relate to those.
And Catherine, just to add in, best practice, they say 10 to 12 years max. And for those of us who have been in the work world for a long time, I'm one of them, 10 to 12 sometimes it's tough because there may be relevant information that goes back beyond 10 to 12. You can get creative with adding things in that isn't in the chronological, but it's maybe past career successes or past career progression, where you add in the few things that are really relevant to something you're going for. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Great. Thanks, Amy Lynn, and thank you, Luann. So it looks like we've got one more in the chat here. So this last question is, I currently hold my MBA with a grad certificate in HR. This December, I will have a master's in human resources and employment relations. By having 2 master's degrees, will getting my SHRM CP make me move up to the front of the line in the hiring pool, or would that not matter? Does experience still overshadow education?
I would say, yeah, experience always, I shouldn't say always, but it depends on the field. But you can't put a price tag on experience. I mean, that's valued by the employer because it shows action that has been applied. The SHRM, I mean, I tell folks, at least in my field, that want certifications and accreditations, that quite frankly, get with the employer and let them pay for it. And then in turn, they would probably reward you for having that, depending on the organization. But it's all SHRM. I know that a lot of employers pay for SHRM, promote SHRM. Some don't value it as much. So it's really, if you have an opportunity to get it at a discount or at a reduced rate, I would say go for it. It's not going to hurt you. But if you also have an employer that would support that, I would say leverage that for sure.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Zach. Was there anything else that any of the panelists wanted to add in before we wrap up? Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thanks everybody. So we do, as Liz mentioned, have a little bit of a surprise plan for everybody today. One of our gracious PHRA volunteers has offered to sponsor 2 student PHRA memberships. So in this bowl, I have the names of all of the students that are on the call today. So I'll let you watch me shake them all up, and I'll read off the names of the 2 lucky winners. All right. So the first name is Faral Alam. Anybody can see that. And this next one, Gwen Norsik. Congratulations. So I will get in touch with the two of you. I'll reach out to you via email, get your login credentials and everything set up. Congratulations.
Catherine. Gwen, I'm glad you got to make it today. I shared some emails with Gwen, so glad that you are here. But again, I just want to thank all of the panelists so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with all of these students. And to the students, the future of your profession is bright. Just by showing up here today and participating in the webinar, you have shown the drive that is necessary to thrive within your early career. So stay positive, everybody. Stay focused. And good luck to you with all of your future endeavors. And thank you again for being here today. And I hope to see you at some point, either on a virtual platform with the PHRA or out at one of our in-person events in the near future. Have a wonderful long weekend, and thank you everybody so much for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ready?